Greetings and welcome to another edition of The Pedal Shift Project. The Pedal Shift Project is a series of conversations, thoughts, and experiments on bicycle travel adventures. From tips and tricks to ideas on how to ride your ride. Let's shrink the world by bike. Show notes and more are available at pedalshift.net/352, and you can email the show at pedalshift@pedalshift.net or text me at 202-930-1109 and check Pedal Shift out on all the socials as well. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 352nd edition of the Pedal Shift Project. My name's Tim Mooney. Thanks so much for joining. On this edition, we are giving the preview for my brand new adventure, the latest bicycle tour / adventure / whatever you want to call it. This is the Space Coast Loop preview. Yes, I am going back to Florida. Now, if you were with me, if you were following Instagram back, right around New Year's, in fact, I think it was New Year's Eve, I posted a picture of my trusty Brompton with a setup that is, well, a little bit of a throwback, a little bit old school, and we're going to talk about what that all means for this particular trip. So let's spend a bit of time talking about what this trip is going to be, what it is going to entail, what gear I'm going to bring, all the good stuff. Let's start off with the basics. This is, as you can tell from the name, a loop trip. It's not a complete loop, I'm going to have to confess, but it's about as close as you can get given the nature of this. Obviously, Central Florida, again, I know I keep repeating a lot of these places, but this time I really wanted to do something different. And I think that this is consistent with some of my goals from the beginning of the year episode that you've already heard, of course. In this version of my Central Florida trip, and for those of you who are new to the show, I have been for the last bunch of years, and took a little pause during COVID, going down around the end of January or early February. If we really want to get technical here, I always pick the weekend that is between the championship games for the conferences and the Super Bowl, just in case my Buffalo Bills actually end up making it into the Super Bowl. That is why I always choose that particular weekend. But in any event, I am going down to Florida again for that time period. The reason is obviously avoiding Super Bowl issues, because someday you never know. The other thing, of course, is the weather's fantastic. It's usually a time in the mid-Atlantic where I spend most of my time that the winter is kind of the most wintry, and Florida is actually really quite excellent during that time of year. It can be up to what I would consider hot, down all the way to, basically very temperate climates. I would never want to ride in Florida in the summer for sure. This is a great time of year to do it. It also allows me to essentially ride in 4 different seasons and have some bicycle adventures and all that. What I have done in the past tends to be, I've done a whole bunch of different versions of it. And those of you who've heard them all know that I typically ride from west to east, except when I don't. And I tend to start in Tampa and end up in Orlando. At least that's been the case for the last bunch of years. The other thing is that I've always used roofed lodging exclusively because it's a lot less gear to carry. Of course, I'm flying down there, and it just makes things logistically a lot easier. I've been doing a ton of road riding, and I basically rolled my own route through the years, and I've dialed that in pretty well. This go around, I wanted to make sure to do something different. If you were with me last year, I believe I promised, for the second year in a row, I think, that I would try to mix in some camping. And we are definitely doing that. That was a huge part of what I wanted to try to accomplish. One of the challenges with camping in that region, you got to be planning way in advance, especially if it's going to be for legitimate campsites. I'm not super comfortable with stealth camping in Florida for a few different reasons that I won't bother getting into too much. So I ended up planning this trip quite a few months ago. In fact, I made one of my campsite reservations, actually both of my campsite reservations, I believe in the summer of 2023, and maybe even a touch earlier than that, just to be able to plant the flag. And I've made some revisions since then. But yeah, it's going to be a camping kind of mixed roofed camping set up, largely because on the third night, there wasn't very good camping in the area that I'll end up in. And of course, I'll explain all of that in a few minutes here. But that's the exciting thing from my perspective, is that I'm finally going to be able to be doing this in a more traditional kind of touring kind of setup. The other thing that I'll mention is that I still like bringing the Brompton. It's so easy to fly Southwest Airlines from DC to Central Florida, whether it's Tampa or Orlando. It's a direct flight. It's super easy. They don't have a good setup, or at least an inexpensive setup for flying a full-size bike. I could, of course, bag up my bike, but I believe that they charge upwards of $100 each way for a full-size bike, which is why I tend to fly Alaska Airlines a lot more, because it's just better for the full-size bike. So we're going to be focused on the Brompton again. That was one of the reasons, one of the few, but bunch of different reasons why I always ended up doing roofed lodging. Just made things a lot simpler. I am going to go a little bit more old school on this particular trip because I think that it just affords me the ability to bring the camping gear in a much easier way. When I tend to travel, as many of you know, I will bring a gigantic duffel, and then I will reassemble and disassemble and do all the different various things that I need to do to get moving. I'm going to go back to the original way that I set up my hauling of gear, and that is the backpack trick. That, of course, now is the throwback to the Instagram post from New Year's Eve and New Year's Day. I think that what it does is it affords me a much simpler situation for getting on a plane, getting off a plane, throwing things on the Brompton and going. So the idea here is that I'm going to be rolling with the Brompton. I'm going to have a full-size backpack. It will be attached pathless pedaled style. Hello, Russ. Hope Catalan is treating you and Laura well. I'm still using your system. So the system basically is there's a dowel that is attached. I usually zip tie it to the rear of my saddle. The shoulder straps hang from there. And I've got a new setup for how I get the bottom of the backpack affixed to the rack. That was something I discovered over the course of basically winter break for me. That basically is I've got a bungee that is pulling it backwards to the rear of the rack. This avoids the heel strike problem that I abandoned the backpack trick for. Now I think I figured out two things. So number one, I realized on this particular backpack, the hip support, I could completely remove that. So that's so much bulk that I could remove that also created a threaded area where I could put the bungee and then strap that and pull that whole rear back to the end of the rack, the rear rack on the Brompton. And so what you get is basically the best of all worlds, less bulk, and it's pulled all the way back. I don't expect to have any heel strike whatsoever on this trip. And that was something that I tended to struggle with when I did the backpack trick, amongst other times when I am riding with the Brompton. So what's really interesting is that I may be doing this as my, I don't want to say permanent way of doing things, but certainly when I need to haul more gear, when I want to haul camping gear. The great part about this is the backpack is a checkable bag in and of itself. So no superfluous bags that need to be brought, and I tend to do that an awful lot when I do these tours and I'm flying. So that's really nice. It's instantly an effective conveyance for all of the gear that needs to get checked. Southwest Airlines allows you to check 2 bags. I may do 2 checked bags on this one because I am going to be bringing my Ortlieb pannier for the front, get a little bit of weight distribution, try not to have so much in that backpack. That affords me a lot of carrying capacity, but I'm going to try to not bring too much stuff. I'm going to really be small and light in terms of the amount of clothing I bring. Not planning on bringing a stove. I'm going to probably be eating on the road as I go along. I'll probably bring like some utensils and a knife or something along those lines so that it's easy to eat in camp. But I'm really going to try to go super light, at least as light as possible. The bike and the bags is enough. Quite frankly, one thing I'll mention is the reason why some people may say, why bother with the Ortlieb? Couldn't you get it all in the backpack? The backpack is not super big. It's probably about maybe 30 liters or 20 liters. So it's roughly got about the same amount of carrying capacity as another Ortlieb back roller. So between the two of them, that's less than when I go fully loaded, but I think it's going to be plenty and probably more than I need, especially when you combine that front Ortlieb. The reason why I'm bringing the Ortlieb, though, is because you just never know what the weather is going to be like. And I just don't know if I'm going to get hit with any kind of real rain. The backpack is not waterproof. I'm going to as I sit here right now, I don't know what the weather situation is going to be for that particular trip. So I will have to decide whether or not I'm going to go with just the rain cover that I've got for it, or whether I want to bring some trash bags to waterproof things from the inside. We'll see. That'll be something that you hear more about in the first episode once we have a better sense of what the actual, not for entertainment purposes only, weather forecast is that I have right now as I sit here. Okay, so that's going to be your basic setup. It's going to be a fun to ride this again. I haven't ridden this way in a really long time. And of course, what this does is because I've got the extra capacity that allows me to bring my tent, my sleep kit, all the things that I have left at home for past Florida trips because I haven't needed them. It's just basically been clothing is all I need, and that's going to be fun. I have to admit, I'm really looking forward to all of this. So let's talk a little bit about the camping situation, because I think that's some of the most fun elements of all of this. But maybe a couple of logistics first. Of course, I just said Southwest Airlines brings me down, not flying to Tampa this time, flying to Orlando. That's fine. That works out just fine. Getting to and from riding out of Orlando Airport would have been my first choice. It's doable. It's not great. Unlike Tampa, where it's a fantastic setup, Orlando has me going, and not so much. Also, what I really want to do, and actually I can't believe it's taken me this long to mention this, I am really going to be exploring the Florida Coast to Coast Trail. Like the Gap, it is a series of regional and local trails that have been stitched together. And while it's not completely 100% off-road yet, the sections that I'm going to be on are pretty much all off-road. The airport, Orlando Airport, is way further south than where this trail is and goes. And that's been some of the challenge here. Where I've wanted to go is not where the trail is. And so that's another one of the reasons why I think I've been able to shake things up a little bit by changing the focus here. So I land in Orlando Airport. I need to get somewhere logical for where the trail is. And that is going to be Winter Garden, Florida. Winter Garden is a suburb that is located west and to the north of the city of Orlando. If you aren't familiar with Orlando's airport, it is way southeast of the city. So I'm going to be grabbing rideshare and going over to Winter Garden. Winter Garden, beautiful little town. Really have never been there before, but it looks really cool. And I do have, how do I put this? I have a long history with Central Florida and that area for reasons I will not bother getting into. It's just I've been going down there for quite a long time for a whole variety of different reasons. Winter Garden has a great reputation for being this cute little town. I'm going to get dropped off right in the middle of town, right by a coffee place there, where I can just basically assemble things all together. The bike, of course, will be folded. It'll be in stealth mode. I'll have the bags that I've got. Should be very easy to be able to transport them without any hassle. Backpack goes on my back. I'll carry the bike in one hand. I'll carry the Ortlieb in the other. It's a little bulky, but it'll do. Get that in the trunk of the rideshare, get there, and then I'll just basically assemble, grab a cup of coffee at the coffee shop there, and off we go. And the nice thing is right there is the Florida Coast to Coast route. I believe that I can't remember which version, or like I said, there are multiple trails there, but it's going to be there that I begin. First day, and I'll go much more into detail of mileages and things like that on the days of each of these pods, but I do want to give you a sense of what it's going to be. That first day, I will ride from Winter Garden and I will end up at my first campground, which is going to be in Lake Monroe. And that's a terribly long day. I don't like to do super long days as the first days, just because you never know if flights get delayed, if I have mechanicals, anything along those lines. It's which is good. Now, the interesting thing about all this is a change from what I had originally wanted to do on day one. I wanted to start much further to the west and actually camp in a different spot, Wakiba Springs Campground. And the reason why I changed it is because doing all the different research I've been doing, which typically is watching a lot of YouTube videos. I found this one Australian dude who found a free campground at Lake Monroe, and it looked really cool. And once I rejiggered things, it actually made the rest of the trip make a little bit more sense without a very crazy long day two. So that's why things ended up being readjusted. I ended up starting off in Winter Garden and ended up in Lake Monroe. Lake Monroe is going to be a fun place. This is the first campground, as I mentioned, that I've ever been at in Florida for a bicycle tour, which is exciting. and it's free, which is kind of cool. And I'll talk much more about that. It's in Volusia County, and I will go into the whole thing for you. If you would like to explore the Florida Coast to Coast Trail, this is a free campground, but you do have to reserve it in advance. And it just happened to be reservable on the day that I needed it, which is great. Okay, so that's day 1. I will be leaving there, and day 2 will be one of my 2 long days, but a really fun day. I will continue and complete the eastbound Florida Coast to Coast Trail. So I will have done essentially from Winter Garden, Florida, right in the middle of the state, all the way to the coast. I will be ending up south of Titusville, north of Cocoa, at Manatee Hammock County Park. It is run by Brevard County. This one, I'm going to start with where I'm ending up because, first of all, cool name, Manatee Hammock County Park. Pretty cool, right? Here's what's extra cool about it. It is literally on the water, so I'm going to be right there on the Atlantic Ocean there. Actually, is that Atlantic Ocean or is that the Indian River? I think it's the Indian River, actually. But the coolest part about it is that from that park, you can see Kennedy Space Center. You can see the launch pad for Kennedy Space Center from that park. And if I get lucky, either that night that I get there on the second day or the morning of day 3, there could be a launch, which I would just lose my mind over. And I would love to be able to share that with you. I may know more as we get closer to the date about whether or not SpaceX or if NASA is going to be launching anything. We will see. If so, that will be a fun extra piece of all of this. But get back to the day 2 ride. One of the 2 longer days, the days 2 and 3 are a little bit longer. They're in the 50-ish mile range. And it includes some really rural parts of the state. Once you get east of Orlando, going out towards the coast, things get real rural real quick. Now, this will be on the Coast to Coast Trail, and it's all off-road. By the way, everything that I've ridden in day 1 and day 2, except for when I go get snacks or food or anything like that, is almost solely on a separated trail, which is just fantastic. I'm really excited about this because you all know how much I've struggled going through some of these road routes that I've dialed up. They're not super built for it. So this will be a lot of fun to hit these. I'll be going through to Titusville after a really long rural stretch of, I'd say, about 30 miles or so where there's just nothing around. But that's all totally cool by me. I got some eyes on a brewery in Titusville that I think I'll end up having dinner at. And then, of course, I'll be at that beautiful looking campground at Manatee Hammock County Park. Camping there was not cheap. I had to, and when did I reserve this? In August. In August of 2023 is when I reserved it. So you really do have to plan. And by the way, I reserved that spot, and I think for that night, there was only 1 spot left. That's the trick with winter camping in Florida. You have to plan way in advance. So unless you're going to do some stealth camping, it's hard to be the non-planner type for these types of situations. All right. So end of day 2, end up at this particular campground, maybe see a launch that night, that morning, who knows? Next day. Now we're going to be leaving the Florida Coast to Coast route for the first time. And for the first time, I'm going to be repeating a portion of a route that I've already done. However, there's a twist. It's going to be going in the opposite direction. I'm going to be retracing my steps for the original. I think the first time I did the cross Florida trip, I ended up going out to Cocoa and Cocoa Beach. And I was going from east to west the entire time. And I rented a car when I ended things. And that's how that trip ended. Now I'm going to be going from east to west, and I'm going to be retracing the really kind of cool portion of the route that gets me from the coast there in Cocoa. Well, I'll be starting off in Titusville, going down to Cocoa, and then cutting over, retracing a route that I've already done and really rather enjoyed back in the day. It included Nova Road. Nova Road goes through the middle of freaking nowhere through grazing land. In that part of the state. And it is a very fast road. I believe the speed limits are 50 or 55 miles per hour, but it is arrow straight. And I had a really good experience riding on it before. If you look at heat maps on Strava and elsewhere, people bike it a lot. So also the pavement is just absolutely perfect. It was so nice a few years ago. So I'm hoping it's still that good. I'm looking forward to possibly, maybe, hopefully it being just as good or better. So that's a really good long rural stretch, which is a repeat of the prior day. from a logistics perspective, I've got to make sure that I've got plenty of water, plenty of sunscreen, plenty of snacks for those two rural sections. It's really interesting for as built up and populated as Central Florida is. That section, once you get east of Orlando, west of Cocoa, it is a whole lot of nothing. People live there, but it's very spread out, very ranchy, very not what you're used to with Central Florida. No theme parks in this part of the state. So that's going to be as I mentioned, another long day, the second 50 plus mile day. And then we got into a little bit of a conundrum from a planning perspective. I would have loved to have camped a third night, but when you start tacking into the point of considering the miles that are going in, I got to the point where I was at a 50 plus mile day before I even got to anything. And you start to enter the town of St. Cloud, Florida, which is next to Kissimmee, which is where you start getting into the influence of some of the hotels and things like that for the theme parks. Thing is that I was around 55-ish miles or so, which is about what I like to max out on for the Brompton in a given day. And there's just a whole lot of nothing around there. You would expect maybe that there would be some campgrounds. No, nothing. A lot of the camping, once you get into that area of influence, tend to be very RV oriented, and none of them were anywhere near how I was coming in through Nova Road and then kind of spitting out into St. Cloud. So this is my first night of roofed lodging, and I found a great little Airbnb at the edge of town there, and it gets great reviews and it's perfect. I think that it'll work out great. I'll probably be pretty cooked on the end of day 3 because that'll be 2 consecutive longer days in a row. And, I'm not going to be used to the heat. To the extent I have any heat, I could catch weather, who knows? But I expect that's a night I'm not going to be going out and, going clubbing and eats. No, that's not going to be happening. Sorry that I put you through that. That's the end of day 3. And then day 4, Tim, you're not going to go to Disney World again. Going to Disney World again. Okay. But here's the thing. I wanted to try to do this in a different way, and I definitely am. I'll talk much more about this on the 4th episode, the day 4 ride, but I'm going to be doing another different approach into Disney World property. It will be going the route that I thought was going to be closed off forever. It looks like it might be because if you've been along for in past years, the first year I went through there, it's like, oh, the road is suddenly gone and there's a development going in and I had to push my bike over a berm. You may remember all this. And then I think it was 2 years ago, it was like, oh, you can get through. The road's kind of there. And then last year, there was a gate. So it hadn't been closed yet, but there was going to be a gate. Well, it turns out that they built a new road that bypasses all of that. So all of the future retirees in their closed gated community, they can feel safe because people like me will not be biking through their community. There's a new road, which, by the way, also has a bike lane, excuse me. So the approach will be very similar, different than last year, because last year I did the big one where I went up through the northern part of Disney property. I'm going to be repeating the entrance through the western part of Disney property. However, I'm staying at a different resort this year, and this is probably a bad idea, but again, you can go back and listen to these things. There's a point where you can make a right on a particular road and there's a sidewalk that gets you all the way to a couple of different resorts. That's the one that I've done before. And if you make a left, the sidewalk kind of ends and it's a bit of a gnarly ride to get to some of the other resorts. I'm going to be making the left. It's probably a bad idea, but I've run it through a few times and I think that it's going to be okay. I think I may regret it maybe a little bit later, but it's only about a mile of dodgy riding. And you know me, I can do a mile of dodgy riding. There's multiple lanes. I'll take the lane. I'll make sure I'm really obvious. I mean, orange little clown bike with a big backpack on the back. I'll be very visible. I'm not too worried about that. So that will be the close of the ride. And I will end up at the resort that I will reveal later. And it will be yet another new way to get to Disney property by bike, which seems to be a thing where it used to be a big mystery before. It does seem like that there are more videos about it on YouTube and whatnot. So it's being done. I would love it. It would be really, really cool because it would take Disney very little effort to throw in some bike infrastructure, at least to connect up some of these places. They don't necessarily need to do it everywhere. It's maybe not in their best interest to have a whole bunch of people biking in and around some of these vehicular areas. But boy, oh boy, they own a ton of land, and it would be really cool if stuff were integrated that way. There's a climate angle. There's all sorts of interesting different things that they could do that would make that a good thing. Will they do it? Probably not, but I'll roll my own. You know me. So that will be the close. I will end up at the resort. That will be the end of the tour. That will be the end of the podcast purposes. And then I think I'm just going to go lay by the pool for the next day because I'll probably need it. No, I'm not going to go fly the Millennium Falcon on this trip. I don't know. Maybe I will. Maybe I'll change my mind. We'll see. But that is the trip. And then I will fly out of Orlando that next day. So very exciting, very fun. Another great adventure. Things that are different this time. New bicycling setup, camping, Florida coast to coast trail, retracing one of my steps except in reverse, and then a brand new entranceway into Walt Disney World property of dodgy means. May make for a great episode. We will see. But I'm really excited about this trip. So excited that, this has actually been something that I've been planning maybe even longer than any single bicycle adventure that I've ever done, mainly because of the camping angle. That was the original impetus here, was I wanted to do the Florida coast to coast trail and I wanted to camp. And I was able to make it all work, but it was nearly 9 months, I think, of planning, maybe more, to be able to pull this off. But there was a bit of an acceleration here towards the end of 2023 and into early 2024 as I was getting prepared for everything here. A couple of other little things that I'll mention, I think, in the episodes themselves, but maybe I'll mention this one thing. My partner Kimberly got me a kickstand for my Brompton, and I didn't put it on there for months. And I just put it on the other day, and I am super excited about it. It will allow me to have the backpack attached to the rear rack and not have to lean the bike up against anything. It will stand on its own. I am a big fan of kickstands when it comes to bicycle travel adventures and touring and whatnot. I get that they're a bit dorky, but you know what? I'm not trying to impress anybody. I'm riding an orange little clown bike with a backpack on the back. I'm not going to be impressing anybody out there, so we'll add the kickstand and ensure that. I think that's going to be really helpful for this particular trip. A whole bunch of other things going into all of this, which we'll talk about during each of the individual episodes. We'll, of course, have 4 days of riding, so we'll have 4 episodes of the show around it. We'll do a wrap up as well. There will be a best of that will kind of interrupt somewhere in the middle there, but of course you're used to that. So this will get us well into the spring, or at least early spring, I should say, for giving you the lowdown on all of this, which is pretty fun and exciting. So great trip. Really excited about it. I think we're doing a lot of new things with this. And I think that I'm really excited to be able to share a new trail for folks. It gets great reviews. It does a lot of heavy lifting. So if you're looking for a Southeastern United States trail option, this is what I'm going to be testing out. And I have a funny feeling that I'm going to like it so much that I'm probably going to have to go back and do the other part of the state that goes all the way out to Clearwater and St. Pete on the Gulf Coast side. So yeah, I think this is going to create more of a Florida problem for me when it comes to cycling. So great weather during certain times of the year, and this is a great way to test it all out. Really excited to bring you all along for the ride. That will be starting, and the next episode, day 1, starts next week.
And as always, we like to close out the show with a special shout out to the Pedal Shift Society. Because of support from listeners like you, Pedal Shift is a weekly bicycle touring podcast with a global community. Expanding into live shows and covering new tours. If you like what you hear, you can support the show for $5, $2, or even $1 a month. And there's one-shot and annual options if you're not into the small monthly thing. Check it all out at pedalshift.net/society. On to the society. Kimberly Wilson, Caleb Jenkinson, Cameron Lean, Andrew McGregor, Michael Hart, Keith Nagel, Brock Dittus, Thomas Skadow, Marco Lowe, Terrence Manson, Harry Telgadas, Chris Barron, Mark Van Ram, Brad Hipwell, Mr. T, Nathan Poulton, Stephen Dickerson, Vince LaGreco, Cody Florchinger, Tom Beninati, Greg Braithwaite, Sandy Pizzio, Jeff Muster, Seth Pollock, Joseph Quinn, Drew Porter, Byron Patterson, Joaquin Robber, Ray Jackson, Jeff Fry, Kenny Mikey, Lisa Hart, John Denkler, Steve Henkel, Miguel Quinones, Alejandro Aviles Reyes, Keith Spangler, Greg Towner, Jody Zeranin, Lucas Barwick, Michael Baker, Brian Bechtel, Reinhard Bigel, Greg Middlemas, Connie Moore, William Gothman, Brian Benton, Joan Churchill, Mike Bender, Rick Weinberg, Billy Crafton, Gary Matushak, Greg Latoile Lopez, James Sloan, Jonathan Dillard, John Funk, Ronald Paroli, Dave Roll, Brian Hafner, Misha LeBlanc, Ari Messenger, David Grotke, Todd Grossbeck, Wally Estrella, Sue Reinert, John Lico, Stephen Granada, Philip Mueller, Robert Lackey, Dominic Carroll, Jackie McCullough, John Hickman, Carl Presseau, David Neves, Patty Louise, Terry Fitzgerald, Peter Steinmetz, Timothy Fitzpatrick, Michael Azuski, Hank O'Donnell, David Zanoni, David Weil, Matthew Sponseller, Chad Reno, Spartan Dale, Carolyn Ferguson, Peggy Littlefield, Lauren Allensmith, Eric Burns, Thomas Pearl, Darren McKibben, Richard Stewart, Dave Fletcher, Jack Smith, Luke Parkinson, Ryan Patterson, Sarus Faravar, John Gardner, Sam Scruggs, Dwight Pintinger, Connie Bowder, Rob Merrifield, and thanks to all past and anonymous folks for helping make this show happen.
Thank you for joining. You can find Pedal Shift at pedalshift.net for more great bicycle touring content. You can hear the Pedal Shift project through Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast app. Opening music courtesy of Jason Kent off his self-titled album. The track is called America. Check out his band Sunfield's latest release, Mono Mono, wherever cool music is available.